The dusty street of Winnetka, Texas seemed to hold its breath as Grace Larkin limped toward the mercantile, each uneven step a reminder of the childhood fever that had left her leg twisted and weak. She could hear the whispers starting already, the way they always did when she ventured into town. But today was different because today was the night of the summer social, and Grace had promised her younger sister she would attend. The year was 1876, and while most young women of 22 were married with children of their own, Grace had resigned herself to a life of solitude. Her father's ranch struggled along the dry Texas plains, and she spent most of her days keeping the books and tending the small vegetable garden behind their modest homestead. The physical labor of cattle ranching fell to her father, and the two hired hands they could barely afford, while Grace managed what she could from the confines of her limitations. "Look at her," came a voice from the group of young women clustered near the general store. "Still thinks she has a chance at finding a husband." Grace kept her eyes forward, her fingers tightening around her walking stick. The polished oak had been a gift from her father on her 18th birthday, carved with delicate wildflowers that reminded her there was still beauty in the world, even when people chose not to see it in her. Grace. Her sister Margaret rushed down the wooden sidewalk, her blonde curls bouncing with each step. At 17, Margaret possessed all the grace and beauty that Grace herself had been denied. "You came to town. Does this mean you will actually come tonight? I promised you, did I not?" Grace managed a smile for her sister, the one person who never looked at her with pity or disgust. Margaret linked her arm through Grace's carefully, mindful not to upset her balance. "Everyone will be there. They say Yates Morrison is coming all the way from his ranch up north." Grace had heard of Yates Morrison. Everyone in 3 counties had heard of him. At 28, he had built his cattle empire from nothing, turning a modest inheritance into one of the largest spreads in Texas. He was known for his fairness with his ranch hands, his sharp business sense, and his complete disinterest in the marriage-minded women who threw themselves at him at every opportunity. "Why would a rancher of his standing come to our small social?" Grace asked as they entered the mercantile. "Apparently, he is looking to establish trade routes through Winnetka. Father heard he is meeting with several of the local ranchers." Margaret pulled Grace toward the ribbon display. "Please let me fix your hair tonight." "Just because you do not care about catching a husband does not mean you should not look your best." Grace touched her light brown hair self-consciously. She had never been a beauty, even before the fever. Her features were pleasant enough, but unremarkable. Add the limp to her plain appearance and she became invisible to most men, or worse, an object of ridicule. "Fine," she conceded, "but nothing too elaborate. I do not wish to draw attention." Margaret's eyes sparkled with mischief. "What if I want my sister to shine for once?" That evening, Grace stood before the cracked mirror in her bedroom, hardly recognizing herself. Margaret had worked magic with her hair, pulling it up in a soft arrangement that actually flattered her face. The dress, a simple blue cotton that matched her eyes, had been altered to fit her properly. For just a moment, looking at her reflection from the shoulders up, Grace could imagine she was like any other young woman preparing for a dance. Then she took a step, and reality reasserted itself with the familiar drag of her weak leg. "You look beautiful," her father said from the doorway. Thomas Larkin was a weathered man of 50, his face lined from years under the Texas sun. "Your mother would have been so proud." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. Her mother had died when Margaret was born, leaving Grace to help raise her sister while managing a household at the tender age of 7. "I wish she were here." "She is, sweetheart. She is in your strength, your kindness." He crossed the room and kissed her forehead. "Now go and have a wonderful time. You deserve happiness, Grace. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. The community hall blazed with lantern light when they arrived. Music drifted out into the warm summer night, and Grace could see couples already spinning across the dance floor through the open windows. Her stomach twisted with anxiety, but Margaret's excited chatter kept her moving forward. Inside, the hall was decorated with wildflowers and colorful bunting. Tables laden with food lined one wall, while musicians played a lively tune on a small raised platform. Grace immediately made her way to the chairs along the far wall, the traditional domain of wallflowers and chaperones. Grace Larkin, you are not sitting down already, Mrs. Patterson, the Reverend's wife, scolded gently. The dancing has barely begun. I am quite content to watch, Mrs. Patterson. Nonsense. You have a lovely smile and a sharp mind. Any young man would be lucky to converse with you. The older woman patted her hand before moving off to greet other arrivals. Grace watched as Margaret was immediately swept onto the dance floor by the blacksmith's son. Her sister moved with natural grace, her laughter ringing out above the music. This was Margaret's world, one Grace could observe but never truly join. She had been sitting for perhaps 20 minutes when she heard the whispers start near the door. A man had entered, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing clean but simple rancher's clothing. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, and even from across the room, Grace could see the strong line of his jaw and the confident way he carried himself. Yates Morrison had arrived. Women immediately began to flutter around him like moths to a flame, but he greeted each with polite distance, his dark eyes scanning the room with an intensity that made Grace's breath catch. She looked away quickly, not wanting to be caught staring. The music shifted to a waltz, and Grace watched as several young women positioned themselves hopefully in Yates Morrison's line of sight. He chose Emily Sanders, the banker's daughter and widely acknowledged as the prettiest girl in Winnetka. They made a handsome couple as they moved across the floor, but Grace noticed that Yates seemed more focused on the business of dancing than on his partner. "Poor man," Mrs. Patterson said, settling into the chair beside Grace. "He cannot take a step without 5 women trying to trap him into marriage. He seems to handle it well enough. Oh, he is polite, but you can see he is not truly present. My husband says Yates Morrison is married to his ranch and has no time for romantic foolishness." Mrs. Patterson leaned closer. "Though I think any man needs a good woman to share his life with, do not you agree?" Before Grace could answer, a commotion erupted near the refreshment table. 3 young women, including Emily Sanders and her friends Catherine Mills and Sarah Ann Cooper, had clustered together, their voices carrying across the hall. "Did you see her?" Catherine was saying, not bothering to lower her voice. "Grace Larkin actually dressed up tonight. As if putting flowers in her hair will make anyone forget that limp. Perhaps she thinks one of the ranch hands will take pity on her," Sarah Ann added with a cruel laugh. Emily glanced over at Grace, and their eyes met for a brief moment. Instead of looking away in shame, Emily smiled coldly. "At least she provides entertainment. Watching her try to dance would certainly be memorable." The words hit Grace like physical blows. She felt heat rise in her cheeks and started to stand, ready to flee into the night, but Mrs. Patterson's hand caught her wrist. "Do not give them the satisfaction," the older woman said firmly. "Those girls have nothing but pretty faces and ugly hearts. You are worth 10 of them." But the damage was done. Grace could feel eyes on her now, some pitying, some amused. The beautiful evening Margaret had tried to create was crumbling around her. Then a shadow fell across her lap. Grace looked up to find Yates Morrison standing before her, his dark eyes serious and kind. Up close, he was even more striking, with strong features and a presence that seemed to fill the space around him. He held out his hand. "Miss Larkin, would you do me the honor of this dance?" The hall went silent. Grace could only stare at his outstretched hand, her heart pounding so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. "I do not dance," she managed to whisper. "Neither do I, as a rule," Yates said, a slight smile touching his lips. "But I find myself wanting to make an exception tonight." "Would you be willing to make one as well?" Grace glanced past him to where Emily and her friends stood with their mouths open in shock. Around the room, people whispered and stared. This had to be some kind of joke, a cruel prank designed to humiliate her further. But when she met Yates Morrison's eyes again, she saw only genuine invitation and something else, something that looked almost like anger, though not directed at her. "I will step on your feet," she warned him. "I have been stepped on by horses and cattle. I think I can survive a dance." He kept his hand extended, patient and steady. With Mrs. Patterson giving her an encouraging nod, Grace placed her hand in his and allowed him to help her stand. Her walking stick clattered to the floor, but Yates was already offering his arm for support. "Hold on to me," he said quietly as he led her to the dance floor. "I will not let you fall." The musicians, after a moment of confusion, began a slow waltz. Yates positioned Grace's hand on his shoulder and held her other hand in his right arm coming around her waist to provide support. She could feel the strength in him, solid and reassuring. "Trust me," he murmured, and then they began to move. It was nothing like Grace had imagined dancing would be. Yates led with such confidence and strength that her weak leg hardly mattered. He practically carried her through the movements, making it look effortless, as if they were simply gliding across the floor together. When she stumbled, his arm tightened, keeping her upright and in rhythm. Grace had spent so many years watching others dance, but experiencing it was something else entirely. The music seemed to flow through her, and for the first time in her life, she felt graceful. She felt beautiful. She felt seen. "You are doing wonderfully," Yates said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You are doing all the work," Grace replied, but she was smiling. "Then we make a good team." The waltz ended, but Yates did not release her. When the next song began, another waltz, he simply continued dancing. Grace saw Margaret on the sidelines, tears of joy streaming down her face. She saw Mrs. Patterson beaming with approval. She also saw Emily and her friends huddled together, their expressions sour with jealousy and confusion. "Why are you doing this?" Grace finally asked as they swept past the windows. Yates was quiet for a moment, guiding her through a turn. "Because those women were cruel and you did not deserve their cruelty. Because you have kind eyes and a lovely smile. Because when I walked in tonight and saw you sitting alone, you were the only person in this room who was not looking at me like I was a prize to be won." "I was looking at you," Grace admitted, then immediately regretted her honesty. "Yes, but then you looked away, giving me the gift of privacy. Do you know how rare that is?" His hand pressed gently against her back. "What happened to your leg, if I may ask?" "Scarlet fever when I was 6. It left me weakened." "Does it pain you?" "Sometimes. Mostly it is just difficult to walk long distances or over rough terrain." "But your mind is sharp. I noticed you were keeping the accounts when I spoke with your father last week about cattle prices." Grace's eyes widened. "You were at our ranch, briefly. Your father was not home, but you were gracious enough to provide me with water for my horse and information about when he would return. You likely do not remember. You were focused on your ledgers." She did remember now. A tall rancher had stopped by, but Grace had been wrestling with numbers that refused to balance, and she had barely looked up from her work. She had assumed he was just another cattle buyer passing through. "I am sorry I was not more attentive." "Do not be." "You were working, and you did not make me feel obligated to engage in empty pleasantries. It was refreshing. The music shifted to a livelier tune, but Yates adjusted his hold and kept them moving in a slower rhythm that Grace could manage. "Tell me, Grace Larkin, what do you enjoy doing when you are not managing your father's accounts?" No one had ever asked her that before. Men did not ask her questions. They barely acknowledged her existence. "I read," she said. "Anything I can get my hands on. Novels, newspapers, agricultural journals. I have been studying new irrigation techniques that might help our ranch." Yates's eyes lit with interest. "Have you considered windmill-driven wells? I have been researching them myself." For the next several minutes, as they continued to dance, they discussed water management, cattle breeding, and the challenges of ranching in the dry Texas climate. Grace found herself forgetting her nervousness, caught up in a genuine conversation with someone who actually valued her thoughts. Other couples had returned to the dance floor, but Grace was barely aware of them. Her entire focus was on the man holding her, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the deep rumble of his laugh when she made a joke about stubborn livestock. They danced through song after song. When Grace's leg began to truly ache, Yates seemed to sense it without her saying a word. He led her to the refreshment table, keeping his arm around her waist to support her weight. "Lemonade," he offered, and she nodded gratefully. Emily Sanders appeared beside them, her smile brittle. "Yates, I was hoping we might have another dance." "I am otherwise engaged, Miss Sanders, but thank you." Yates handed Grace a cup of lemonade, his attention never leaving her face. Emily's cheeks flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Surely you cannot plan to spend the entire evening with Grace." "People will talk. Let them talk," Yates said coolly. "I am dancing with the most interesting woman in the room. Why would I wish to do otherwise?" Emily flounced away, and Grace could not help but laugh, though she immediately felt guilty. "You have made an enemy there. I will survive." Yates sipped his own lemonade. "Your leg hurts. Shall we sit?" "I do not wish to keep you from dancing with others." "I told you I do not dance as a rule. Tonight is an exception, and I am making it for you alone." He guided her back toward the chairs, but instead of leaving her there, he sat beside her. They talked for another hour, their conversation ranging from books to politics to dreams for the future. Grace learned that Yates had lost his parents to cholera when he was 19 and had built his ranch from almost nothing. He had educated himself through borrowed books and hard experience. He loved the land, the work, the challenge of creating something lasting. "What about you?" he asked. "What are your dreams, Grace?" No one had ever asked her that either. Grace looked down at her hands, suddenly shy. "I suppose I dream of being useful, of running my own household, managing things well, maybe even helping to build something important. I know I cannot do the physical labor of ranching, but I have a mind for organization and numbers. I would like to use those gifts. You already are using them. For my father, yes. But I would like to do more, to be more." She paused, then added quietly, "I would like to be seen as more than my limp." Yates reached over and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. The gesture was intimate and sent warmth spreading through Grace's chest. "I see you, Grace Larkin. I see your intelligence, your strength, your quiet dignity. The limp is simply a part of you, like my calloused hands are part of me. It does not define you." Tears stung Grace's eyes, but they were good tears. Happy tears. The evening wound down eventually. Families began to gather their children and head home. Margaret appeared with a knowing smile, offering to wait outside to give Grace a few more minutes. "I should let you return to your family," Yates said, standing and helping Grace to her feet. "But I wonder if I might call on you properly. Your father mentioned he would be attending the cattle auction in Fort Worth next week. Perhaps I could visit your ranch while he is away, and we could continue our discussion about irrigation techniques. Grace's heart soared even as her practical mind urged caution. You wish to court me. I wish to know you better. If that leads to courtship, I would be honored. He retrieved her walking stick and handed it to her. I have spent years building my ranch, Grace. I have worked hard and made something I am proud of, but a ranch is just land and cattle without someone to share it with. Tonight, talking with you, I felt something I have not felt before. I would very much like to explore that feeling. Yes, Grace said, the word escaping before she could second-guess herself. Yes, you may call on me. Yates smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face into something boyishly handsome. Then I shall count the days until next week. He escorted her outside where Margaret waited with their father's wagon. The night air was cool and filled with the sound of crickets. Before Grace could climb up to the wagon seat, Yates caught her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Thank you for a wonderful evening, Grace Larkin. You have given me something precious tonight. What is that? Hope. The ride home passed in a blur. Margaret chattered excitedly about how romantic the evening had been, how everyone was talking about Yates Morrison dancing all night with Grace, how Emily Sanders had left early in a fury. Grace barely heard any of it. She kept reliving the feel of Yates's arms around her, the warmth in his eyes, the way he had made her feel cherished and valued. Grace, Margaret said suddenly, her voice turning serious. Do you think he means it, about calling on you? I do not know, Grace admitted. But even if he does not, tonight was still wonderful. For one evening I felt like any other woman. That is a gift I will treasure. But Yates Morrison was a man of his word. The following week, with her father away at the auction, he arrived at the Larkin ranch in mid-morning. Grace had been working in her garden, her skirts tied up practically, and her hair covered with a kerchief when she heard the horse approach. She looked up to find Yates dismounting, leading a fine chestnut mare. He wore his working clothes, dusty from the ride, and his face lit up when he saw her. I hope I am not calling too early, he said, removing his hat. Grace was suddenly aware of how she must look, dirt under her fingernails and sweat dampening her collar. I was not expecting you quite so soon. I am a mess. You are beautiful. He said it with such simple honesty that Grace had to look away, her cheeks warming. Is this your garden? It is thriving despite the heat. I built an irrigation system using angled troughs and rain barrels. Grace stood, wiping her hands on her apron. It is not perfect, but it helps conserve water. Yates walked through the garden, examining her system with genuine interest. He asked intelligent questions, and Grace found herself explaining her methods, showing him the modifications she had made over the years. They talked for an hour among the tomato plants and bean rows, and Grace forgot to be self-conscious. You have a gift for this, Yates said finally. My ranch could benefit from someone with your practical ingenuity. They walked back toward the house, Grace's limp more pronounced after kneeling in the garden, but Yates simply adjusted his pace to match hers without comment or fuss. Would you like to see my father's books? Grace offered. I recently reorganized them by topic rather than by acquisition date. It makes finding reference materials much easier. I would love that. They spent the afternoon in her father's study, talking about everything and nothing. Yates told her about his ranch, the cottonwood spread that lay 2 days' ride north. He described the rolling hills, the creek that ran year-round, the house he had built with his own hands. Grace told him about her childhood, about losing her mother, about the fever that had changed her life. You resent it? Yates asked. The limitations it placed on you. Grace considered the question carefully. Sometimes, but it also taught me to value things others overlook. I learned to observe, to think, to find my worth in my mind rather than my body. I would not wish the pain on anyone, but I cannot say I would trade who I became because of it. That is wisdom beyond your years, or simply acceptance of what cannot be changed. Yates reached across the table where they sat and covered her hand with his. I meant what I said at the dance, Grace. I see you, all of you, and what I see is extraordinary. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Grace had imagined. Yates visited twice a week, always bringing small gifts. A book he thought she would enjoy, seeds for her garden, a new pen and ink for her bookkeeping. They took walks around the ranch property, Yates slowing his long stride to accommodate her pace, his arm always ready to provide support. He never made her feel weak or broken. Instead, he asked her opinions on ranch management, discussed his business decisions with her, and genuinely seemed to value her input. When Grace designed a new system for tracking cattle breeding cycles, Yates immediately implemented it on his own ranch and wrote her a letter describing its success. The letters became a treasured part of their courtship. Yates wrote eloquently about his days, his challenges, his thoughts. But more importantly, he asked about her. He wanted to know what she was reading, what problems she was solving, how she was spending her time. His letters made Grace feel important, cherished, seen. 3 months into their courtship, Yates invited the entire Larkin family to visit the Cottonwood Ranch. The journey north was long but beautiful, and Grace felt her excitement building with each mile. Yates had described his home, but seeing it was something else entirely. The ranch house sat on a rise overlooking a valley. It was larger than Grace had expected, built of solid timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The barn and outbuildings were well maintained, and cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. "What do you think?" Yates asked as he helped Grace down from the wagon. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "You built all this yourself, with help from my ranch hands, yes. It has taken 8 years, but I am proud of what we have created." He offered his arm. "Come, let me show you the house." Inside was even more impressive. The rooms were spacious and well appointed, with large windows that let in generous light. The kitchen was modern and efficient. But what caught Grace's attention was the study. "I thought you might appreciate this," Yates said, watching her face. The room was lined with bookshelves, already partially filled. A large desk sat before the window, and filing cabinets stood against one wall. It was a room designed for someone who valued organization and learning. "It is perfect," Grace whispered. "I built it hoping someday I would find someone to share it with." Yates moved closer, taking both her hands in his. "Grace, I know we have only been courting a short time, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I am in love with you. Your intelligence, your strength, your gentle heart, the way you challenge me and inspire me, the way you see the world with such clarity and kindness." Grace's breath caught. "Yates, I want to wake up every morning with you beside me. I want to build this ranch into something even greater with you as my partner. I want to grow old watching you work magic with numbers and irrigation systems, and anything else you set your brilliant mind to." He released one of her hands to pull a small box from his pocket. "Grace Larkin, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" The ring inside the box was simple but beautiful, a gold band with a small sapphire that matched her eyes. Grace looked from the ring to Yates's hopeful face, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Yates, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were something precious and rare. When he finally kissed her, it was gentle and reverent, a promise of all the kisses to come. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Winnetka. Grace wore a dress of cream silk that Margaret had helped her sew, and wildflowers were woven into her hair. The whole town turned out for the wedding, including Emily Sanders and her friends, though their expressions were more sour than celebratory. Grace did not care. As she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her eyes were only for Yates. He stood at the altar looking proud and happy and so handsome in his Sunday best that Grace felt her knees go weak. "Who gives this woman to be married?" the Reverend asked. "Her sister and I do," Thomas Larkin said, his voice thick with emotion. He kissed Grace's cheek and placed her hand in Yates's. "Take care of my girl." "With my life," Yates promised. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed Grace with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. The reception that followed was a joyful affair, with music and dancing and more food than the small community had seen in months. And true to the night they met, Yates danced with Grace all evening long. They swayed together under the lantern light, and Grace marveled at how much her life had changed. She had gone from the limping girl everyone pitied or mocked to a cherished wife with a future full of promise. "Happy," Yates murmured against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible. Good. Because this is just the beginning." The beginning indeed. Grace moved to the Cottonwood Ranch and immediately set about making it a home. She took over the bookkeeping and ranch management, her organizational skills transforming the operation. What had been a successful ranch under Yates's leadership became exceptional under their combined efforts. Grace implemented new systems for tracking everything from feed costs to breeding schedules. She negotiated better prices with suppliers and found new markets for their cattle. She designed irrigation improvements that increased their agricultural output and allowed them to weather the dry seasons better than neighboring ranches. But more than her practical contributions, Grace brought warmth and life to the Cottonwood. She hosted dinners for the ranch hands, making them feel valued rather than just employed. She started a small lending library in the bunkhouse. She remembered birthdays and asked about families and generally made the Cottonwood a place where people wanted to work. Yates watched her flourish with pride and love that grew deeper every day. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch and talk about the day, making plans and dreaming dreams. At night, they would lie in each other's arms, and Yates would tell Grace how beautiful she was, how much he loved her, how grateful he was that she had taken a chance on him. "I think I am the one who took the chance on you," Grace would tease. "No, my love. You are the greatest blessing of my life. Everything good that happens here is because of you." Their first year of marriage was blissful. They worked hard together, building their ranch and their relationship. They learned each other's rhythms and quirks. Grace discovered that Yates sang off-key while doing chores. Yates learned that Grace needed quiet time in the mornings to organize her thoughts for the day. They had their challenges too. Grace's leg pained her more than she liked to admit, especially in cold weather. Yates worried about her overdoing things and had to learn to let her set her own limits. They argued occasionally about ranch decisions, but they learned to listen to each other and compromise. The following spring, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She had worried that her physical limitations might prevent her from having children, so the news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. "What if the baby inherits my weakness?" she asked Yates one night, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Then we will love that child with all our hearts and teach them they can do anything they set their mind to, just like their mother." Yates kissed her forehead. "But Grace, your leg is not weak. It is different, and it has not stopped you from being the strongest person I know." As her pregnancy progressed, Grace had to adjust her routines. She could no longer spend long hours in the garden or walking the property. but she continued managing the books and planning ranch improvements from her desk. Yates was attentive without being overbearing, making sure she had everything she needed while respecting her independence. Margaret came to stay with them as Grace's time drew near. The sisters spent peaceful afternoons together, sewing baby clothes and talking about the future. Margaret had begun courting the schoolteacher in Winnetka, and Grace delighted in hearing about her sister's romance. "I used to think you would never find happiness," Margaret admitted one day. "Not because you did not deserve it, but because people could not see past your limp to the wonderful person you are. I am so glad Yates was different." "So am I," Grace said softly. "He gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me, a ranch and a home. No. He made me believe I was worthy of love." When Grace went into labor on a warm September evening, Yates was beside himself with worry. The doctor had come from Winnetka and assured him that everything was progressing normally, but Yates paced the hallway like a caged animal. "Your wife is strong," the doctor told him. "She will be fine." After 12 hours of labor, Grace gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When the doctor placed the squalling infant in her arms, Grace felt love unlike anything she had ever experienced. The baby had Yates's dark hair and what looked like her blue eyes. "A son," she whispered as Yates entered the room, his face pale with anxiety. "Are you all right?" He rushed to her side, his eyes searching her face. "I am perfect. We are perfect." She shifted the baby so Yates could see him better. "Look what we made." Yates looked down at his son with wonder, one finger gently stroking the baby's tiny hand. The infant's fingers curled around his father's, and Yates's eyes filled with tears. "He is beautiful, just like his mother." They named him Thomas, after Grace's father, with the middle name of William after Yates's father. Little Thomas was a happy baby, healthy and strong, and he became the center of their world. Grace proved to be a natural mother despite her fears. She nursed Thomas while reviewing ranch accounts. She sang to him while planning irrigation schedules. She managed to balance motherhood and ranch management with the same efficiency she applied to everything else. Yates was a devoted father. He would wake for middle-of-the-night feedings, walking the floor with Thomas while Grace rested. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving it with the same wildflower design that graced Grace's walking stick. He talked to his son constantly, telling him about the ranch, the cattle, the dreams he had for his future. "You can be anything you want to be," Yates would tell Thomas. "Your mother and I will support you in whatever path you choose." As Thomas grew, the Cottonwood Ranch continued to prosper. Grace's innovations had made them one of the most successful operations in the region. Other ranchers began to seek her advice, and Grace found herself consulting on water management and record-keeping systems. She had become respected in her own right, known for her sharp mind and practical solutions. The cruelty she had experienced in Winnetka seemed like a distant memory. When they visited town, which they did several times a year, people greeted her with genuine warmth and respect. Emily Sanders had married a wealthy rancher and moved away. The other women who had mocked Grace at that long-ago dance now sought her friendship and advice. "How does it feel?" Yates asked her once after a particularly successful trip to town. "Being celebrated instead of scorned," Grace thought about it carefully. "It feels validating. But honestly, Yates, what matters most is not their opinion. What matters is that I know my worth, and you know my worth, and together we have built something meaningful." "You are wiser than I will ever be," Yates said, pulling her close. When Thomas was 3, Grace became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. She continued her ranch work until the very end, and when she went into labor on a crisp November morning, she was calm and ready. Their second son, James, was born with Grace's light brown hair and a disposition as sunny as a spring day. Thomas was fascinated by his baby brother, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feedings. "Gentle," Grace would remind him as Thomas patted the baby's head. "He is very small. When will he play with me?" Thomas asked. "Soon enough. For now, you can help me take care of him." The cottonwood rang with the sounds of children. Grace had never imagined such happiness was possible. She would sit on the porch in the evenings, Yates beside her and their sons playing at their feet, and feel such profound gratitude that it brought tears to her eyes. "What are you thinking?" Yates would ask, taking her hand. "That I am the luckiest woman alive." "I am the lucky one, Grace. You gave me everything I did not even know I needed." Over the years, they continued to build their life together. They added onto the house, creating more space for their growing family. They expanded the ranch, buying adjacent land when it became available. They invested in their community, helping to fund a new school in Winnetka and supporting families who struggled during hard times. Grace's father eventually retired from ranching and came to live with them at the Cottonwood. He spent his days teaching his grandsons about cattle and horses, passing on his knowledge to the next generation. He watched Grace with obvious pride, marveling at the life she had created. "Your mother would be so proud," he told her often. "I am so proud." Margaret married her schoolteacher, and they settled in Winnetka. The sisters remained close, visiting frequently and raising their children together. Margaret had 3 daughters who adored their cousins Thomas and James, and the 5 children would run wild around the Cottonwood whenever they visited. As Grace approached 30, she looked back on her life with amazement. She had gone from a girl who thought she had no future to a woman with a rich, full life. She was a wife, a mother, a successful ranch manager, and a respected member of her community. Her limp was still there, sometimes more pronounced when she was tired or the weather turned cold, but it was just one small part of who she was. One summer evening, Yates arranged for the ranch hands to watch the children so he could take Grace to a dance in Winnetka. It was the first time they had attended a social together since their wedding, and Grace felt butterflies in her stomach as they entered the community hall. The room looked much the same as it had that night 10 years earlier. Lanterns cast warm light across the floor. Musicians played familiar tunes. Families gathered and talked and laughed, but everything was different because Grace was different. She was no longer the girl sitting alone against the wall, hoping to be invisible. She was a woman who knew her worth, who had built a life of meaning and purpose, who was deeply loved and deeply loving in return. "May I have this dance?" Yates asked with a smile, offering his hand just as he had all those years ago. "Always," Grace replied, taking it. They moved onto the dance floor together, and Grace felt the same magic she had felt that first night. Yates held her close, leading her through the steps with the same strength and confidence that had made her feel beautiful all those years ago. Around them, couples danced and children played. Grace saw Mrs. Patterson watching them with a satisfied smile. She saw younger women looking at her and Yates with envy, not of his wealth or status, but of the obvious love between them. "What are you smiling about?" Yates asked. "Just remembering the first time we danced. How terrified I was. How certain I was that it had to be some kind of joke. And now I know it was the beginning of my real life, the night everything changed, for me too." Yates pulled her closer. "I walked into this hall a successful rancher with everything I thought I wanted, but I was lonely, Grace. I did not even realize how lonely until I saw you sitting there, so dignified despite the cruelty around you, and something in my heart just knew." "Knew what?" "That you were the missing piece. That everything I had built was just waiting for you to make it a home." They danced through several songs, lost in each other and their memories. When Grace's leg finally began to ache, Yates led her outside into the cool night air. They stood on the steps of the community hall, his arm around her waist, looking up at the stars. "You ever think about that night?" Grace asked. "About how easily it could have gone differently. What if you had not asked me to dance?" "But I did." "But what if you had not? What if you had danced with Emily Sanders all night instead?" Yates turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face gently. "Grace Morrison, I believe with all my heart that we were meant to find each other. If it had not been that night, it would have been another time. You cannot hide a light as bright as yours, even if you try. I would have found you eventually, and I would have fallen in love with you just the same." "I love you," Grace whispered. "More than words can say." "Show me instead," Yates murmured, and kissed her under the stars. They returned to the cottonwood that night with full hearts. Their sons were sleeping peacefully, and Grace's father reported they had been angels. Grace kissed both boys goodnight, marveling at their peaceful faces, before retiring to her room with Yates. As they lay in bed together, Yates's arm around her and her head on his chest, Grace thought about all the moments that had led them here. The pain and loneliness of her childhood. The cruel words and mocking laughter. The fear that she would never be loved. And then that one magical night when a kind rancher had asked her to dance and changed everything. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For seeing me, for loving me, for giving me this beautiful life." "Grace, you gave me this life. You are the heart of everything good here. Our sons, our ranch, our home, it all exists because of your love and your brilliance." He kissed the top of her head. "I should be thanking you every day for taking a chance on me. We took a chance on each other. And what a beautiful gamble it turned out to be." The years continued to pass in a blur of happiness and hard work. Thomas grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books almost as much as his mother. James was more adventurous, always exploring and getting into good-natured trouble. They were healthy, happy children who knew they were loved. Grace and Yates weathered the challenges that came their way. There were drought years when they struggled to keep the cattle fed and watered. There were seasons when prices dropped and money was tight. Grace's leg continued to pain her, and some mornings it was difficult to get out of bed. Yates developed a bad back from years of hard ranch work, but they faced everything together, drawing strength from each other. Grace's practical problem-solving and Yates's stubborn determination saw them through the hard times. And the good times were so very good. When Thomas turned 10, he asked his mother about her limp. He had never questioned it before. It was simply part of who she was. But a boy at school had made a comment, and Thomas wanted to understand. Grace sat him down and explained about the fever, about how it had left her different but not less. She told him about the cruelty she had faced as a young woman, but also about how it had taught her strength and resilience. "Some people could not see past my limp to the person I was inside," she told him. "But your father could. He saw me, all of me, and loved me anyway. That is the kind of person you should aspire to be, Thomas. Someone who sees people for who they really are." "I think your limp makes you special," Thomas said with the simple wisdom of childhood. "It is part of you, and I love all of you." Grace hugged her son close, tears in her eyes. This was the legacy she wanted to leave her children, the understanding that worth came from character, not physical perfection. That love was about seeing and valuing the whole person, that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. James, listening from the doorway, piped up, "Papa says you are the strongest person he knows. Your father is kind." "No, he means it. He says you do not let anything stop you from doing what needs to be done. He says that is real strength." Grace looked over at Yates, who had entered the room behind James. Their eyes met, and the love there was as strong as it had been on their wedding day. "Your mother is remarkable," Yates said, coming to stand behind her chair, his hands resting on her shoulders. "And I hope you boys grow up to be half as strong and clever as she is." That night, after the boys were in bed, Grace and Yates sat in their study going over the ranch accounts. It was a comfortable routine they had developed over the years, working side by side in companionable silence broken by occasional conversation. "We had a good year," Grace observed, tallying the final numbers. "Better than I projected. Thanks to your management. That new water system saved us during the dry spell. It was your idea initially, but you made it work." Yates set down his pen and stretched. "Grace, I have been thinking. We should start putting money aside for the boys' education. I want them to have opportunities we did not have." "I think that is wise. Thomas especially has an aptitude for learning. He gets that from you." They discussed plans for their son's future, their dreams for the ranch, repairs that needed to be made before winter. It was mundane conversation, the everyday talk of a married couple, but it filled Grace with contentment. This was the life she had dreamed of: partnership, purpose, love. When they finally retired for the night, Yates pulled Grace close in their bed, his arms around her in the way that had become second nature over the years. "You remember the day I proposed?" he asked. "Of course. I told you I wanted to wake up every morning with you beside me. I have done that for 11 years now, and it never gets old. You are still the first thing I want to see each day." "You romantic fool," Grace teased, but her voice was thick with emotion. "Only for you, my love. Only for you." Time marched on as it always does. Thomas went away to school when he turned 16, studying business and agriculture with plans to return and help run the ranch. James followed 2 years later, though his interests lay more in veterinary medicine. Both boys made their parents proud with their intelligence and character. Grace's father passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 74. The whole family mourned him, but they took comfort in knowing he had spent his final years surrounded by love, watching his grandsons grow into fine young men. Margaret's daughters grew up and married. Some moved away, others stayed in Winnetka. The Larkin and Morrison families remained close, their children growing up more like siblings than cousins. Through it all, Grace and Yates remained each other's foundation. They grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining lines earned through years of laughter and hard work and life fully lived. Grace's limp became more pronounced with age, and she finally conceded to using her walking stick more regularly. But she never let it slow her down. Even in her 50s, she was still managing the ranch accounts, still consulting with other ranchers, still finding innovative solutions to old problems. She became something of a legend in the region. The woman who had overcome ridicule and physical limitations to become one of the most successful ranch managers in Texas. Young women would seek her out for advice, and Grace always made time for them. She would tell them about the importance of education, of knowing their own worth, of not letting others define their limitations. She would tell them about the night a kind rancher had asked her to dance and changed her life. "But the real change was inside me," she would always add. "Yates helped me see my worth, but I had to believe it myself. That is the most important thing, believing you are worthy of love and respect, regardless of what anyone else says." When Thomas returned from school at 21, he brought with him a young woman named Sarah, a professor's daughter with a quick mind and kind heart. Yates and Grace welcomed her warmly, and within a year, they were planning a wedding. James came home at 23 with his veterinary degree and immediately set about improving the health management of their cattle. He met a rancher's daughter named Elizabeth at a livestock auction, and it was love at first sight. Within 3 years, both sons were married and living on the cottonwood with their wives. The ranch house, which had once seemed so spacious, was suddenly full of laughter and life again. Grace delighted in her daughters-in-law, both of whom were intelligent women who appreciated being treated as equals. "You have raised remarkable sons," Sarah told Grace one day as they worked together in the kitchen. "Thomas treats me as a partner, values my opinions. That is rare." "He learned it from watching his father," Grace replied. "Yates has always believed that a marriage should be a true partnership. You are fortunate to have found such a man." "I am, but I also think we create our own fortune sometimes." "I could have given up that night, stayed home from the dance, let the cruel words keep me hidden. But I chose to go, to take a risk, and everything changed because of it." The first grandchild arrived when Grace was 54, a baby girl named Grace after her grandmother. Holding that tiny infant in her arms, Grace felt the circle complete. She had gone from a girl who thought she had no future to a woman with a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. More grandchildren followed. Thomas and Sarah had 3 children: Grace, John, and Mary. James and Elizabeth had 2, William and Alice. The cottonwood rang with children's voices once again, and Grace and Yates delighted in their roles as grandparents. "We are building a dynasty," Yates would joke, watching his grandchildren play. "We are building a family," Grace would correct. "One founded on love and respect and hard work." On their 30th wedding anniversary, Yates arranged for another dance. This time it was private, just the 2 of them on their porch under the stars. He had hired musicians who played softly while Yates took Grace in his arms. They moved slowly, Grace's steps more labored now with age and arthritis, but Yates still led her with the same gentle strength he had shown 30 years earlier. "I would do it all again," Yates murmured against her hair. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you 1,000 times over." "Only 1,000, Grace teased. "A million. A billion. However many lifetimes there are, I would choose you in every one." They danced under the stars, 2 people who had found each other against the odds and built a life of meaning and love. Around them, their families slept peacefully in the home they had created together. The ranch they had built together stretched out in all directions, a testament to their partnership and determination. Grace thought back to that terrified girl at the dance, certain she would never be loved, never be valued. If she could go back and tell her younger self what the future held, she would not believe it. But she would also tell that girl to be brave, to take chances, to believe in her own worth. Because sometimes, if you are very lucky, a kind rancher will ask you to dance. And if you are brave enough to say yes, he might just dance with you all night long. And then, if you are very blessed indeed, he will keep dancing with you for the rest of your life. As Grace and Yates swayed together on their porch, the music soft and sweet, Grace reflected on all the blessings she had received. A husband who loved her unconditionally. Sons who made her proud. Daughters-in-law who felt like her own daughters. Grandchildren who filled her days with joy. A ranch that had become a home, a legacy, a testament to what 2 people could build together. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked, as he had asked her countless times over the years. "That they laughed at the limping girl," Grace said softly, "but the rancher danced with her all night long. And he is still dancing with her now." "Always," Yates promised. "I will always dance with you, Grace Morrison, until my last breath and beyond. Beyond. Even death will not stop me from loving you. I will find you in whatever comes after this life, and I will ask you to dance again." "And I will say yes," Grace whispered. "I will always say yes to you." They continued to dance as the stars wheeled overhead, 2 souls who had found each other, chosen each other, and built a beautiful life together. The music played on, soft and sweet, a perfect soundtrack to a perfect moment. Inside the house, their family slept peacefully. On the land around them, their cattle grazed under the watchful eye of loyal ranch hands. The legacy they had built together would continue long after they were gone, passed down through generations of children who would know the story of how their grandparents met. They would tell the tale of the cruel women who mocked a limping girl, and the kind rancher who saw past physical limitations to the extraordinary woman beneath. They would speak of love that overcame prejudice and built an empire. They would remember that true worth comes from character, not appearance, and that the greatest blessing in life is finding someone who sees you, all of you, and loves you anyway. Grace and Yates danced until the music ended and the musicians packed up their instruments. Even then, they stayed on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Another day," Yates said. "Another blessing," Grace replied. And hand in hand, they walked inside to begin it together, as they had done every day for 30 years, as they would continue to do for all the days they had left. The years that followed were gentle ones. Grace and Yates gradually stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing Thomas and James to take over. They remained advisors and consultants, their wisdom valued by their sons and the larger ranching community. Grace continued her work with young women, mentoring and encouraging them. She became known as a champion of education for women, arguing passionately that an educated woman was an asset to any family or business. Several young women from the region came to stay at the Cottonwood, learning bookkeeping and business management from Grace, before going on to help run their own family ranches. Yates spent his time with his grandchildren, teaching them about ranching and life. He would tell them stories of the old days, of building the Cottonwood from nothing, of falling in love with their grandmother at a dance. The children never tired of hearing how Grandpa had swept Grandma off her feet, dancing with her all night despite the cruel laughter of others. "You were very brave, Grandpa," little Grace would say. "No, sweetheart, your grandmother was the brave one. I just had the good sense to recognize something precious when I saw it." On Grace's 60th birthday, the entire family gathered at the Cottonwood for a celebration. Children and grandchildren came from near and far. Friends from Winnetka made the journey. Even some of Grace's former proteges attended, bringing their own families. The party was held in the barn, which had been decorated with flowers and bunting. Tables groaned under the weight of food, and musicians played lively tunes. It was a celebration worthy of the remarkable woman being honored. Thomas stood to give a toast, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "My mother has taught me many things over the years. She taught me the value of education, the importance of treating everyone with respect, and the power of perseverance. But most importantly, she taught me about love. The love between her and my father has been the foundation of this family, and we are all blessed to have witnessed it." Sarah stood next. "I knew within 5 minutes of meeting Grace Morrison that I was in the presence of someone special. She welcomed me into this family with open arms, never making me feel like an outsider. She has been a mentor, a friend, and the best mother-in-law anyone could ask for." One by one, family members and friends stood to share their memories and appreciation. There were tears and laughter, stories and jokes. Through it all, Grace sat beside Yates, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love. When it was finally time for Grace herself to speak, she stood with Yates's help, leaning on her walking stick but standing proud and tall. "I cannot tell you what it means to be surrounded by so much love," she began, her voice steady despite her emotion. "There was a time when I thought love would never find me. I believed the cruel voices that said I was too broken, too limited, too ordinary to be cherished. But then a rancher walked into my life and showed me something I had not known, that love sees the heart, not the limitations of the body. She looked at Yates, tears streaming down her face. Yates Morrison gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. He gave me the courage to believe in myself. Everything good in my life flows from that one night when he asked me to dance. Our sons, our grandchildren, this ranch, the work I have been able to do, it all exists because one man looked past my limp and saw me. Yates stood and took her hand, his own eyes wet with tears. So I want to say to everyone here, Grace continued, especially to the young people, your worth is not determined by what others think of you. You are valuable, you are important, and you deserve love and respect. Do not let anyone make you feel less than you are. Be brave enough to believe in yourself, and good things will follow. The crowd erupted in applause, but Grace was not finished. And to my Yates, she said, turning to face him fully, thank you for 36 years of dancing. Thank you for seeing me, loving me, building this beautiful life with me. You are my heart, my home, my everything. Yates pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the crowd cheered and clapped. When he kissed her, it was with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day, a reminder that true love does not fade with time. The party continued late into the night. Grace danced with each of her grandsons, with Thomas and James, with old friends from Winnetka. But she saved the last dance for Yates, and they swayed together under the lantern light. Two people who had weathered the storms of life and come through stronger for it. As the years passed, Grace and Yates settled into a comfortable rhythm. They spent their days on the porch, watching their grandchildren play and helping where they could. They took walks around the property, Yates adjusting his pace to match Grace's slower steps. They read together in the evenings, discussing books and ideas like they had since the beginning. Their love remained constant, a steady flame that warmed everyone around them. The younger couples in the family looked to them as an example of what marriage could be. A true partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. When Grace was 68, she fell ill with pneumonia. For weeks, she battled the infection, and the family feared they would lose her. Yates never left her side, holding her hand through the worst of it, telling her stories of their life together, begging her to hold on. I am not ready to stop dancing with you, he told her. Please, Grace, please stay with me. Whether it was his love or her own stubborn determination, Grace pulled through. It took months for her to fully recover, and she was frailer afterward, but she was alive. Yates treated her recovery like a miracle, treasuring each additional day they had together. I thought I had lost you, he confessed one night as they lay in bed. You will never lose me, Grace assured him. Even when this life ends, I will find you again. That is a promise. They had 8 more precious years together after that. Years filled with new great-grandchildren, with the continued success of the Cottonwood Ranch, with quiet moments and cherished memories. They celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary surrounded by 4 generations of family. Grace passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76, Yates beside her as he had been every night of their marriage. She simply went to sleep and did not wake up, her face peaceful and content. The funeral was the largest Winnetka had ever seen. People came from all over Texas to pay their respects to the woman who had overcome so much and given so much back. Young women she had mentored spoke tearfully of her impact on their lives. Her sons and grandchildren shared stories of her wisdom, her strength, her boundless love. Yates sat through it all in stoic silence, holding the walking stick he had carved for Grace so many years ago. After the service, when everyone else had left, he stood beside her grave, his weathered hand resting on the headstone. "I will see you again," he promised. "And when I do, I am going to ask you to dance, just like I did that first night, and you are going to say yes, just like you always have." Yates lived 2 more years after Grace's passing. He remained at the Cottonwood, surrounded by family, but everyone could see that part of him was missing. He spoke often of Grace, telling stories about their life together, making sure the grandchildren and great-grandchildren knew about the remarkable woman their grandmother had been. On what would have been their 47th anniversary, Yates asked Thomas and James to help him into town. They drove him to Winnetka, to the old community hall where he had first danced with Grace all those years ago. The building was older now, worn by time, but still standing. Yates walked inside slowly, his sons supporting him on either side. He stood in the center of the dance floor, closed his eyes, and could almost hear the music from that long-ago night. "She was sitting right there," he told his sons, pointing to the wall, "looking beautiful and sad and so alone. I walked over and asked her to dance, and she looked at me like I had offered her the world. In a way, I suppose I had, but she gave me so much more in return." "You loved her very much," James said quietly. "I love her still. Death cannot change that." That night, Yates passed away in his sleep, a smile on his face. His family liked to think he had gone dancing with Grace again, that they were together somewhere beyond this life, swaying to music only they could hear. They buried him beside Grace, their headstones side by side, together in death as they had been in life. The inscription on Grace's stone read, "She danced through life with grace and courage." On Yates's, he showed her the steps and never let go. The Cottonwood Ranch continued to thrive under Thomas and James's leadership, and eventually passed to their children. The story of Grace and Yates became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The walking stick Yates had carved for Grace was preserved as a family heirloom, a reminder of where they had all come from. Young couples in the family would visit the graves on their wedding days, laying flowers and asking for the blessing of a love as strong and true as the one Grace and Yates had shared. It became a tradition, a way of honoring the foundation upon which the family was built. And sometimes, on warm summer nights, ranch hands swore they could see 2 figures dancing on the porch of the old house. A tall rancher and a limping girl, moving together in perfect harmony, still dancing after all these years, because true love does not end with death. It echoes through generations, inspiring and guiding those who come after. Grace and Yates had proven that love sees past physical limitations, past social expectations, past all the barriers the world tries to place in its way. Their love had been built on respect, partnership, and genuine affection, and it had created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The people of Winnetka never forgot the story of the limping girl and the rancher who danced with her all night long. It became a tale mothers told their daughters, a reminder that worth comes from within, and that true love recognizes value where others see only limitations. And in the Cottonwood Ranch house, now occupied by the 5th generation of the Morrison family, Grace's portrait hung in a place of honor. Painted when she was 50, it showed a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, her walking stick resting beside her chair. Beneath the portrait, a plaque told her story, how she had overcome ridicule and physical challenges to become one of the most respected ranchers in Texas, how she had mentored countless young women, and how she had been loved beyond measure by a good man who saw her true worth. The legacy of Grace and Yates Morrison lived on in the values they had instilled in their family. Treat everyone with respect, value character over appearance, work hard, love deeply, and never let anyone tell you that you are less than you are. These principles guided each new generation, keeping the family strong and united. And somewhere beyond the veil that separates this life from the next, Grace and Yates danced on, their love eternal, their partnership unbroken, proving that some bonds are strong enough to transcend even death itself.